Hey everyone, welcome to How to Run the Perfect Sprint. This is our Jira for Scrum Masters course, and I got a new member. So, Chad, thank you so much. Thank you so much for becoming a member and for supporting your. I know you've become a bit of a regular. And just to recap for everybody else watching, if you do become a member like Chad, I do have live streams that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be setting those up, Chad. So, coming very soon. I'm going to be making a post to the members, so that's coming out. But I'm going to be doing a lot more like behind the scenes kind of thing. So if you're interested in any of that, it's going to be available to our members. More importantly, though, we do have monthly member only videos that I make that are just kind of like my thoughts and give them to you. And then we got a bunch of other stuff planned out here for members because I've been thinking about memberships quite a bit. And so make sure, yeah, if you're interested in that, definitely thanks again, Chad, for the support there. All right, for everybody else, again, we're going to be talking about how to run the perfect sprint today. I'm going to give you all my tips and tricks from the ground floor, right, from the battle line, the front lines, on how to run this perfect sprint. Because everything that we've done up to this point, it all goes sideways on you if you don't follow these steps, right? Because you can do the perfect planning, you can do all the setting up, right, all the strategic items that we've covered over the last few months on creating the perfect relationship between epics and stories and estimating everything out. But here's where the rubber meets the road. And so I'm going to give you real world advice that I've actually used over the last few years running agile teams on how to maximize, if not increase, your chances of success. The session is being recorded. It's going to be available on YouTube. Slides aren't available. I don't have a whole lot on the slides, although this one I do have more than usual, but still not available because everything's just on this video. So go back, rewatch the video, subscribe to the channel, all right? Turn on those notifications because we do go live every single week. And so maybe you're not signed up for the courses, but maybe you want or you're interested in some of the other things that I do. So hit that notification button because I do go live. And I the summer of it lasts is 100 videos in 100 days. So there's no shortage of videos here. Say hello in the chat. We already got Jessica from Re Medical. So welcome, Jessica. And so if you're new here, if you're tuning in, whether you're a seasoned vet, right? We have folks like Chad here who's been here for forever. We got new people here as well. So just feel free to say hello. I always love to see where all the friendly faces are coming in from. Also, we have a leaderboard. So I just want to let you know that as you're chatting, we have like a little sidebar competition going on there on the side. So feel free to engage with the chat here. Top 3 people apparently get a special badge. Again, this is something that's new that YouTube is rolling out. So definitely, interact, be as interactive as you can, ask questions, speak with each other, help each other out. Again, I've already mentioned, become a member. Oh, you do get early access to all the videos. I forgot to mention that. So every video that I post for the Summer of Atlassian, you get early access to all that. You have member-only videos. We're going to do member-only live streams, member-only posts. There's a lot of stuff going on in the member-only. And then also just call out, there is a super chat donation offer or button available for you there. And then stick around to the end because we got some exclusive offers for you all. Now, a little bit about me. My name's Alex. If you've never seen me or met me, hi. I make a lot of YouTube videos here on the internet. And so I do have a bachelor's in engineering, a bachelor's in computer engineering, a master's in systems engineering, a couple of cybersecurity things here and there. I do have the ACP 120, 520, and 620. And in about 2 weeks' time, I'm going to start studying for the ACP 420, which is the last ACP that I need to get. And so we're well on our road to getting them all. I am not only the host here of the Jira Life. Sorry, I don't just run this show here, but I'm also the host of the Jira Life. And so I'd highly recommend if you are looking for a community, if you're looking for a place where you can hear me banter a lot about the things, the good, the bad, and the ugly happening in the Atlassian ecosystem, then definitely go check out the Jira Life. We go live every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern. So we have a lot of fun there. And then I have a bunch of free courses, paid courses. I have a bunch of like merch. I have a bunch of stuff going on. So definitely check out that link tree and go see how you can support the channel and be like Chad here. And again, thank you so much, Chad, for becoming a member of the channel. All right. So enough of the marketing stuff, and let's get into what are we going to be learning today. So we're going to focus on 3 major themes or topics for today. Number 1, things to do. And if I could spell correctly, this would be easier. Number 1, things to do before starting your sprint. Okay. I'm going to double down on those things because if you get into your sprint, right? If you're actually executing on the sprint, then we do hit like a point of no return. So there's a couple of things before you actually hit that start sprint button, before we start executing on our sprint. I want you to double check a few different things just to make sure your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted before you hit that start sprint. Okay, so we're going to cover that. Two, we're going to cover the laws of Jira. Okay, there's a couple of rules that you need to be aware of. So we're going to cover those. And then finally, we're going to wrap it up with things to do during your sprint. All right. Now, I'm going to move this presentation over to the side because I actually want to remind myself of these things and just to help you out and make sure we're all following along nicely here. Ronnie says the perfect sprint doesn't exist, but in 50 minutes time, I'm going to show you that it does, Ronnie. So doubters come. I welcome all the doubters. Ronnie also says happy Jira admin appreciation day. So give yourself a little pat on the back. If you are a Jira admin, great job to you for keeping the lights on and helping people not lose their sanity in your company. So it's a thankless job, but Roddy and I, we salute you and thank you so much for your service here with the world of Jira. Jira Access Perfect exists in dummy projects only. Folks, okay, so maybe the perfect sprint is a bit of a stretch, but there's ways to maximize your probability of success here. And I'm going to give you again those tips that I've used over the last few years. Angie says, hello, Rodney's on 07, or is that an emoji? I'm not sure. Okay. Let's continue. All right. So first, we're going to cover what should you do before you hit the start sprint button. So I'm going to actually complete my sprint here. And I'm going to cover over a couple of things that you want to be worried about or thinking about before you hit your start sprint button, okay? Because once you hit your start sprint button, it's like a point of no return, right? We're not going anywhere, right? So I'm just going to close all these things out, right? And so here we are. We're in a sprint, right? We haven't started it, right? Our start sprint button is not yet available. And I want you to consider three things, all right? I want you to think about three major things that you got to remember before we start our next sprint, okay? Number one, always, always, always make sure that all of your stories, your tasks, your bugs, whatever you have going on in here, make sure they are all estimated, because the reports that we're going to be leveraging during this sprint or during this lecture here, if you don't have the story points, then you're going to have a less than ideal experience. And so you want to make sure that you do not start your sprint without ensuring that everything in your sprint has story points. So if you see something like this that doesn't have any story points, make sure you go and put story points in them. Now, fun little fact, all right, we're actually hitting a little limit of Jira. You're going to notice that right now I'm putting story points into specific items here. But when I scroll up to this bug, you're going to notice that I can't do the same thing. I cannot put story points in that bug. For the Jira admins in the room, right? Because we do have Jira Appreciation Day, Jira Admin Appreciation Day. Why am I not able to put story points on a bug? Who wants to take a guess here in the chat? Oh, it's a guy saluting. Oh. Oh. That is clever, Rodney. That is clever. Rodney, yes, you are allowed to answer. Why can I not put story points on a bug? And then Angie says story points for Scrum boards only. Yeah, so story points are for a Scrum board only. But the question right now is, why am I not able to put story points on a bug? Okay. Ronnie says field context. So let's go down this little path. I'm going to try not to make this too technical. But the answer, as Rodney has pointed out, is for some reason, I don't know why Atlassian does this. I think it's kind of weird, in my opinion. And I'm trying to find nice words, right? But for some reason, only epics and stories can get story points out of the box. I have a brand new Jira that I made here. And so it's kind of weird. So if you are struggling, if you're not able to put story points on your tasks or your bugs, or basically anything that's not a story or an epic, then this is why. Right. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure you're a Jira admin. You're going to go to your gear. You're going to go to work items. And another weird quirk of this whole thing is that story points is not a custom field. Story points ships with Jira. But for some reason, Atlassian treats it as a custom field. And so you're going to be able to find it under the custom field section. So just type in story and you'll see story points. Do not, I repeat, do not go to story point estimates. Story point estimates is a field for team managed projects. But as you all know, we do not touch team managed projects in this world. Okay. So story points, plural, this is the one you want. Do not touch estimate. This is going to be for team managed projects only. And we don't do team managed projects here. Right. So we're going to want to find story points. Click on your three dots over here, go to your context. And as Rodney is calling out, we want to go look at our field context, right? And so right here, this is technically a context, right? So we're going to click on edit context here. And we are going to basically update this because I tend to just update it to any issue type. But as you saw out of the box, it is restricted to just the epic and the story for some very weird reason. I don't understand that. But I want to be able to estimate everything. So I'm going to do global all work items. Now, you, of course, can set it up however you want, but just know that global work items is going to let anybody have story points. So once we did that, we can go back here, and now I can resume what I was doing, and I can put story points on a bug, as you can see there. So just curious, why do we do team managed? Why don't we do team managed? So we don't do team managed for a variety of reasons, but the biggest one, the biggest example I like to use is well, two reasons. One, it's like you're paying for a Ferrari. Imagine Jira is a Ferrari and a team managed project is like driving a Corolla. And so you paid the price for the Ferrari, but you're driving a Corolla. And so one, that doesn't make sense. But two, team managed projects are designed to get you into Jira. They're designed to get you into the Atlassian ecosystem quickly, efficiently, right? But then they fall flat on their face the moment you become an enterprise, right? The moment you need two or more teams working with each other, collaborating with each other, strategically planning work out, then these team managed projects fall flat on their face because they just don't scale, right? And that's just from a strategic perspective. But from an admin perspective, they're a maintenance nightmare because anybody can be an admin on those projects. You don't have to be a Jira admin per se. And because you don't have to be a Jira admin, you're not trained in the ways of Jira. And because you're not trained in the ways of Jira, you tend to do silly or questionable mistakes that then make your Jira maintenance a nightmare, which then makes it a complete horror story for your real true Jira admin. So we just try to avoid team managed projects altogether because they end up just cluttering or really messing up your Jira in the long term, and they end up not being scalable to enable your teams to work together. So that is my politically correct answer as to why we don't use team managed projects. They are a curse, and you should avoid them at all costs. Chirac says, you do not know how much effort needed for bugs, so Atlassian not mentioned. Right. Okay. So I'll give that to you, Chirac. Maybe I don't know the effort for a bug, but what about a task? Right? A task is like a story. It should be known. Right. And what if you have something else? What if you have a new issue type like a spike or a risk or any other issue type that you make or work type, right? That's at the level of the story. It's not a good policy. Okay. I don't think it's a good policy. Angie says we typically point our bugs after it's been analyzed and triage. That's fine. That's totally cool. But again, with the out of the box configuration, you couldn't even put story points even after the analysis and triage. So then you got to go fix that if you want to ever be able to point or put story points on your bugs. All right, folks, really, really good questions. And Christopher Barron, hopefully you don't work for Atlassian because normally people from Atlassian are the only ones that ask me why we don't do team managed projects. But yeah, this is why. Okay, so back to the story here. So make sure everything has story points. You want to make sure every little gray square here is filled out. You're going to thank me later. It's going to come into play in a few minutes. Number two, this is totally optional, but capacity resource management is a very real thing, right? And so when you're looking at your work, you want to make sure that your work is somewhat evenly distributed amongst your team, right? You don't want Sally to carry 9/5. That's not a right number. You don't want Sally to carry 4/5 of the sprint, right? And so you want your work to kind of be not exactly, equally distributed, but you want it to be within some mean, right? And so when you assign the work to an individual, and this only works when you assign the work to an individual, you get these three dots over here. And so once you assign work to people, you'll then be able to see each individual that has work assigned to them, how many items are assigned to them, and their total number of story points. And so in this particular case, our sprint is carrying 100 points. Yay. But look at the work distribution. Mitch Davis better be like a superstar player, right? Mitch Davis better be making very, very well into the $200,000-300,000 range, at least relative to administrator. Oh, I get it. Administrator, right? Because administrator is definitely not carrying their weight. They got 2 compared to 18. And so these are the conversations you're going to want to have before you start your sprint. Because if Mitch is carrying 18 items and admin is carrying 2, then we are minimizing our chances of success because one person has way too much work and another person doesn't have enough work. And so the expectation that you have on Mitch to complete 18 66 story total story points might be unrealistic, right? Might, because maybe Mitch is a superstar, right? Maybe Mitch is really, really awesome, and 66 is a walk in the park, right? But this is going to vary from team to team. I find it hard to believe that Mitch is going to be able to carry 50%, almost 50% of the work is 50% of the almost 50% of the tasks, and was it 2/3 of the story points are assigned to one individual. So the success or the failure of your sprint is literally on the shoulders of Mitch. So what if Mitch gets sick for the week? What if Mitch has a vacation plan, right? What if Mitch gets pulled to another high priority project? These are things that we're setting ourselves up for failure if we're not watching them carefully before we start our sprint. So you want to watch this workload distribution and make sure again that the scales get tipped a little bit more balanced, right? I would take away a few items from Mitch and make sure that admin over here is getting a little bit more work. So we'll stop there for some questions. Ronnie says, Team Ash projects is the path to the dark side. Team Ash projects lead to bloat. Bloat leads to slowness, and slowness leads to suffering. I sense many Team Ash projects in your instance. Angie says they work items. The work items are various statuses, maybe. Oh boy, Angie, I forgot what the question was, but maybe. Okay, so again, just to recap, we've done 2 very critical things. We have made sure everything is story pointed, and second, we've assigned, but only for the purposes of being able to see that workload distribution. Okay, because again, we don't want to walk into the sprint top heavy or leaning to one side, because then that's going to hurt our probability of success in the sprint. Now, the last thing before we hit the start sprint button is and this is before you bring any new work, right? And so if you remember from a few minutes ago, I completed a sprint and this rolled over, right? And so everything that you see in the sprint is rollover work, all right? And this is very critical, right? Because our goal when we're running a sprint, or at least when we're going to finish a sprint, we want to minimize the amount of rollover work, right? We don't want to carry items from the previous sprint. And there's a variety of reasons for that, right? Because if you look at all of these items here that are in testing, right? Accepted, architecture, right? Whatever these statuses are, basically anything that's not to do, that means that work has started. And this is going to have 2 very serious implications. Number one is if the work has started, right? The number carried over as well, right? The estimate from the developer is not from this sprint, but rather from the previous sprint. And so for anything that's in progress, you want to audit these items. And you want to ask this developer, Mitch, hey, Mitch, this one's in progress. It's a story point 3. We're starting it or restarting it or continuing it in the next sprint. Is it still a 3? And or optionally, this is an optional step, if Mitch finished, like, let's just say he finished like 2/3 of the work, do we want to split the story? Because splitting the story allows you to take credit for the part that got completed and then create a new one where it's like finish the current UI home screen, right? And then he can estimate that one to just be a 1. Oops. Right? And so you can split your stories, right? You have the ability to split a story and then send this one to done. Because once this one's done, we can get that one off of our board and we're just going to focus on that one story point, right? So now we don't have an inflated board, right? We don't have inflated story points. And the stories that are actually here and the numbers that are actually here are much more realistic to the reality. Again, now this step is completely optional. Some teams hate it, some teams love it. I'm a fan because, especially for anything that's currently like already in progress, a lot of the times, the majority of the time, a lot of the heavy lifting has already been done. And so what you're doing is you're carrying big, heavy points, but your team is like almost there. And so you have this, you think you have more work than you don't. And so it just gives you a bad representation. So I audit these items before we start the sprint just to make sure that the numbers are as accurate as possible. Because again, when we start our burn down reports, you don't want to come in with just a bad data, right? Because it's just, again, it's setting you up for not success, setting you up for somewhat of a failure. And so you want to audit your things that are, especially anything that's not in to do, right? Especially anything that's not in to do. You want to audit it. All right. Angie said that's an anti-pattern. No splitting allowed when we need to push that requirement feature to product. Again, some people hate it, some people love it, but you got to consider, right? You got to consider the bigger picture, Angie, right? Because if you are, and this is going to lead to the next point I was going to try to make, right? If you're doing this, right? If your work is carrying over from sprint to sprint, right? It really just depends on how much of a pattern and how much behavior is your work going from carrying over from sprint to sprint. Because if it's normal, right, if your team continuously rolls items from one sprint to the next sprint, then it doesn't matter if it's a pattern or an anti-pattern or whatever, you have a problem, right? You have a very serious problem with your team, and so you got to go fix it, right? This is a band-aid, I will call it, right? Splitting stories to me is a band-aid, but you ultimately want to get the product out the door, and you need to help your team gauge the scope, right? They need to become better at gauging scope, and splitting the stories allows them to think about that to some degree, right? I think the right answer, though, however, is you should have done a better job at the beginning, and you should have had smaller stories. And when you have smaller stories, you don't have to split work, right? And so, um, there's a bunch of different techniques, and again, there's no silver bullet here. These are just options for you if you're continuously rolling your work, right? And so, again, it's all in the behavior of your team, right? If your team is performing well, then you don't have to split anything. However, you want to consider, right? You want to consider that you don't deliver stories, right? That's another thing, another controversial thing. Are you actually delivering a story, or is your feature, right? Because we're pushing the requirement feature to prod. To me, especially, right, when I'm developing a feature, it's not the story itself, but it's the epic, right? So I can split the story as many times as I want, as long as it's still associated to the same epic, and we're still trying to get the epic slash feature out and delivered, right? And so again, it's a matter of perspective, and it's a matter of how your team breaks down the work. You got to go back and rewatch my previous lectures on this, because it makes more sense when you go look at the other lectures, right? But it all depends on how, again, you plan your work and where you actually deliver, right? Because a story is just a piece of the puzzle. To me, it's not the full puzzle. So I can split it a few times if I need to, just to make my board metrics look better, and help hold the team more accountable, right? Rahid says, I'm assuming by splitting the story, Jira will automatically create linked. Yes, I believe so. Let's see. Let's open up that split one that we just did. Let's see. Where did I put it? Finish. It said the word finish, right? Somebody help me find the one that I did. Oh, here we go. So if I open up mobile 52, yeah, it splits from, and in fact, it links it with this specific relationship here. All right, folks. And again, we're just trying to the reason we're doing this, right, is because we need the most accurate number and representation before we start the next sprint. Because if you're coming in with inflated numbers, you're not doing yourself a service either, right? So you're gonna lose any way you look at this. We're just trying to minimize how much you lose, because it sucks overall, right? In theory, in the perfect world, you wouldn't have any rollover work, right? You just wouldn't. And so if you continuously have a lot of rollover work, then if you don't want to split stories, then my recommendation would be you got to push your team harder to break the stories down. You should have already had 5 stories instead of one giant story, okay? Which is a split in theory, right? And so you got to push harder, because if your team is continuously rolling, then that's not good for anybody either, right? So you got to evaluate your things and go from there. Okay. So we've done the story points, we've done the assignings to check out that workload, and again, we've addressed any carryover work to make sure it's all good. Then at that point, then yeah, you can bring in anything new, right? Make sure it has story points in it, and then you're ready to start your sprint. So we're going to hit start sprint, and we're going to hit start here. Whoopsie. Apparently, I got to go farther into the future. All right, we're going to hit start sprint here. Don't mind the dates. Dates are a little less relevant, but let's see what we got going on. Oh boy, the end date must be after the start. Oh, 2023. Holy moly, when did I get that far back? Oh boy. I didn't even realize that we were that far back. All right, let's just go 2 weeks, hit start, and we are now on the races. Now, the laws of Jira. I'm going to give you the biggest rule of Jira here, and this is going to either stab some people in the heart or it's going to hurt real hard. Okay? And here's the rule. Here's the number one rule. Here's the only rule that you need to know. In Jira, okay, and I'm gonna group to none just so you see everything. Okay. In Jira, this is a law. You cannot mutate this law. This is a rule that you have to follow, and you're either gonna love it or you're gonna hate it. But this is a rule that you need to be aware of. In order for you to get credit for something, right? In order for you to get credit, that is, Jira considers that item to be done for the sprint. Okay. That item, whatever it is, whether it's a story, whether it's a task, whether it's a bug, whether it's a subtask, right? That item must make it to the farthest right column. That is the only way you get credit in Jira, at least from a Scrum board perspective. It's the only way you get credit for completing something. The status is irrelevant. That's a strong word. The status is less relevant. That's a better word. Okay? Because what I've seen some teams do, right? I've seen some teams have like a done status, right? Because the code is complete. And then they have a column where like maybe the PO or somebody else, or product owner or somebody's got to approve it, right? Maybe somebody else has to accept it. And so you only get credit. And Jira will only knock something off of your board, off of your sprint, and like move it away and won't roll it to the next sprint only when it makes it to the farthest right column. If you have extra statuses or extra columns beyond code complete or wherever you're defining the end of the road to be, then be aware that all that work is going to roll over. And this presents us with a couple of different challenges, right? We're going back to the splitting stories and splitting hairs here. Because if your developers, right, when you're estimating your points, if you're estimating just the development aspect of it, awesome. Mazel tov. That's good. That's awesome. However, what I see a lot of teams do is they'll estimate for the developers, but then they have statuses that apply to other players that are not the developers. And so now we have a very big problem, right? Because you estimated for the development aspect, but you're tracking the whole enchilada, the whole big picture. And that, my friends, is a problem because Jira is only going to give you credit for the items that move to the farthest right column. And your story points are not going to match that reality, right? Because your story points are being given to you by a developer for the development complexities of that particular story or task or bug, right? But if your process has a UAT process, if your process has system testing, stress testing, right? Performance testing that is done by another player, by another member of your team, and that's part of your workflow and it's part of your Scrum board, you are going to be in for a very rude awakening. And you're going to realize that the majority of the time, your estimates are inaccurate relative to your reality because your reality is you have more steps than you are estimating for. Right. And so we can get into the logistics of that. That's way more advanced. And if you need any help with that, I'll point you back to my link tree so that you can get a hold of me. I do offer consulting services where I can sit down and, chat with you and your team and help you figure it out. But this is a pretty big problem that most teams hit where they're like, okay, well, we have a problem, right? The workflow that we have does not align with what we're actually tracking here, right? And so you want to modify your boards, you want to set up your settings to give you the highest probability of success, and you want to make sure that the line in the sand where you draw done is more realistic, right? And so in this particular case, when my developer finishes it, they are the ones doing the testing. So as long as the same individual is doing their testing, and as long as you're expecting to get it accepted and you expect it to be released within the sprint, then we're fine. This workflow is great because the developer is going to estimate the development part, the testing part, the review part, and all of their CI/CD, right? Because if you're a DevOps organization and you actually are expecting to push the code, deliver the code out to the production site, right? Going back to Angie's here, right? We're pushing the requirement to prod. And so, Angie, you have a bigger problem here, right? Because if you're expecting that story to go to prod, then your CI/CD process, your DevOps process, needs to also be in tight alignment with what's going on in your board and your workflow here. Because again, if there's a disconnect in any way, shape, or form, you're setting yourself up for failure because then there's a disconnect, right? And so it's like talking two different languages in the same team. And so you want to make sure that when you're looking at your board, it is realistic to the actual steps that you're estimating for, because anytime that's not true, then you're going to have a less than ideal experience with Jira. And so you want to modify or review your workflows, review who's doing what. Maybe your estimates need to include estimates from the tester, from the reviewer. Maybe your task is, or your stories for the development, and maybe you have an associated task. Maybe you break things down into subtasks, right? And there's no silver bullet here, and I don't want to get hit with more anti-patterns, right? But there is no silver bullet, and there is nothing out there that's just going to be perfect, right? You all were giving me crap earlier at the beginning when I said how to run the perfect sprint, and y'all told me there's no perfect sprint, right? And so perfect clearly doesn't exist. So um, you just got to work with what works for you, right? And so these are some of the common problems that I see when I'm working with teammates here, right? And or with companies and organizations. So again, no silver bullet. There is no one answer that's right. Just a bunch of different maybes that you can try, right? And so that's the rule here that I wanted to make sure that I drove home for you, right? Is that if you are trying to get credit, right? If you're like, why is this story keep popping up in my next sprint? That's because the only way a story is not going to show up in the next sprint is when you hit complete. When you hit complete, and it needs to make it to the farthest right column. All right. So in the chat, let me know if any of you have any questions on that. That was a little bit more philosophical than I probably would have liked to get into, but it's the hard law and it's a hard rule of Jira. Ronnie, you're being awfully quiet as well. Maybe you had to drop to a meeting, but anyways, make it go to the farthest right column. And so you get to control what the farthest right column is. So keep that in mind. And if you need any help, again, check out my link tree to get some one-on-one help with me. Okay, so now let's move on to things to do during your sprint, right? So now that you know the rule, right? Now that you know the hard set rule, what are some things that we can do, and what are some pro tips here that I'm going to give you over the next 20 minutes or so? So number one, you should be running a daily scrum, right? So as part of your process, right, you should be doing some sort of a daily scrum or daily stand-up, whatever you want to call it. If the far right column doesn't set a resolution, it still doesn't count. That may be true from a resolution perspective, but now we're talking workflows. I haven't. I don't know if you're asking me a question, Ronnie, or if that's a statement. I don't think it matters as long as you don't want an item to roll up to the next sprint. It just needs to be in the farthest right column. I mean, that's the only way to give you the burn down. Whether it needs to be resolved or not, I'd have to go test that. But if you're telling me a statement, then I'll believe you. But I haven't looked at it deeply, or at least not recently, to tell you right off the top of my head. But as a good practice, as a general practice, I would agree that your farthest right column should also set a resolution so that you're not two birds with one stone. You're getting the credit, you're getting the burn down, you're going to get it knocked off of your scrum board, and it's going to not roll to the next sprint, and you're getting it crossed out so that Jira gives you credit from the Jira's database perspective, and the JQL comes up correctly. And Ronnie says that it's a statement. So apparently you want to make sure that you're setting a resolution in one way, shape, or another. Angie says, we use easy agile planning poker to have all the development teams include their estimate for each story. Yeah. So again, this is perfect, right? This is what most teams do, Angie, right? They have the story points are for the development. The problem is when your workflow or your board has non-development statuses in it. That's when you run into problems. Nicholas says, how do you do discovery and delivery within a sprint? How do you separate boards? A task can't go through all the processes in one sprint, i.e. define code, test, demo, feedback. Yes. So this is where we get, so Nicola, this is where we get into some theoretical philosophical things, right? Number one, Agile has something called the spike, right? And so I would recommend that you evaluate or research how to use spike work types, because the spike work type is there to help you with the definition and then the discovery part of it, right? My 2 cents is that when you have a story, by the time you create a story, you should already have a bunch of unknowns known. And if you don't have unknowns known, then you should really be creating spikes to go make those discoveries, to go make those revelations, if you will, and then come back and make your story. And the beauty of it is that it's all grouped by the epic. So you can't have an epic that follows a different workflow than your story, and there's a discovery status in your epic, and in that discovery status, that's where you create your spikes for that feature, right? For that big requirement. Those get planned into your sprints. You have a sprint of discovery, right? Where you're doing a lot of research. And then you're going to come back in with your newfound knowledge and then create your stories that are much more well defined. Okay. That's how we address the front part. On the test and demo feedback part, this is again now where it's just a matter of your philosophy, right? If you're following Agile or Scrum to the T, you need to all those steps, your coding, your testing, your demonstration, your feedback, those steps have to happen within the bounds of your sprint. And so if you're continuously exceeding that, right? If you're exceeding the bounds of your sprint, then you either A, need to pull in less work into your sprint, or the stories need to get smaller so you can drive the probability of success higher. Another path, which is the one I usually recommend to teams because they don't want to follow Agile or Scrum to the T, is that you then go into a Wagile Scrum Fall type of Scrum bond, if you will, of a method, right? And again, reach out to me if you need more help with this, because it's a little bit more of an advanced topic, but there is a way for you to create multiple boards and control which statuses show up on which board, so that you can still have the full picture, but still have more dedicated boards. So you can have like a dev board and a QA board. Okay. And so again, nothing's perfect. There's no right answer to anything. Everybody's problems are unique, but that's how I would address it. How do you manage BAU and improvement work together? So I am not sure what BAU is. If you want to help me out with BAU, I can give you my 2 cents on that. Okay, so back to things to listen for, right? So assuming you're running a daily Scrum, right, and you should be, right, you should be doing either daily stand-up, Scrum, whatever you want to call it, right? Here's some things you should be watching out for, especially if you're the Scrum Master, right? You want to be listening with your ears. Okay. I feel like I'm teaching kindergartners, but you want to be listening with your ears for the following items. Number one, if this individual, Alana, is talking about how she's working on, she's accelerating the checkout process for the application by adding some sort of a caching mechanism to the database, right? I'm totally making things up, right? But if Alana's talking about how she's improving the scalability and performance of the checkout system, we have a problem, because Alana, if I click on her picture and you look at her stories, none of the stories that are assigned to Alana deal with her improving the efficiency of the checkout system. So this is your opportunity to have a whiskey tango foxtrot, right? Like WTF, like what are you doing? Because why are you working on something that's not in your sprint? And to add insult to injury, if there is like not even a story, even in your backlog for this work, like that's like the ultimate betrayal, right? And so you want to be listening for these things as a Scrum Master, right? Because your developers, they're a smart group of people, and they're going to go work on things that they want to go work on, not necessarily the things that they have to work on. Okay, so there's a very clear distinction. A developer will always work on things they want to work on and push off the things that they have to work on, right? It's human behavior, human psychology. We all do it, right? And so you want to be listening for their updates during your stand-ups to make sure that whatever it is they're updating you on, it's actually something that's in the board. Because if they're working on something else that's not on the board, right? And worst case, if it's not even in the backlog, right? But really hone in, right? They should be always giving you status updates or just, updates in general on, or they should be discussing, right? Even if it's not an update, but the context of the conversation should be centered around a story that is actually assigned to them. Because if they're not, then guess what's not going to happen to these stories? They're not going to get worked, right? Um, they're going to be working on something else that's not even in your sprint. So guess what's going to roll over for sure is these stories because they never got worked on. So you want to be listening. You want to be listening for cues. And I point blank ask them like, okay, what story is that for? Right. And they have to go and tell you the story number because again, developers, much I'm a developer myself, so I feel like I can bash and trash talk a little bit more on the developer side because I'm a developer, but I know this, right? I was there. I lived there. My wife's a developer. I we work together a lot, and so I see this often too many times, right? Where we just developers want to work on cool stuff, and sometimes that means not working on the stuff you're assigned. All right, and so make sure that they are all of the conversations are happening around stories that are in the sprint. That's going to happen way too often. Okay, that's the first thing you should be listening for. The second thing you should be listening for, and Rodney, if you want to drop it in here, can you give me your tagline for the Jira guy? I think it's appropriate for this next part of the conversation, right? But the second thing you want to be listening for is let's take this story over here. Change login related support documentation. Alana tomorrow or to this in a couple of hours when we have our stand up, she'll come in and say, "Hey, so today I started working on the login information. I got all the support documentation. I started getting the outline, right? I started doing the outline and it's almost done. I'm almost done with it. I'm about to start testing it, right? Well, guess what's not updated? The status of this item, mobile 20, is still in to do. And so another thing that you want to help, right? Because oftentimes things carry over from sprint to sprint simply because the developer forgot to update it and move it to the appropriate status. And so this is a problem. You want to make sure that your developers, not you as a scrum master should not become their secretary, right? But you as a scrum master should hold them accountable and remind them to update their own statuses. Don't do it for them because that's a very easy way to fall victim to, oh, it's the scrum master's job. And then that's how you quickly become a secretary. That's how you quickly stop losing value. And that's how you quickly accelerate your when there's a reduction in force and you get laid off, right? Because you're just a secretary. Anybody can do the secretary job. So don't do that. Don't update statuses for people, but remind them, have you updated your Jira work items today, right? Because they need to follow along here. And so they're responsible for updating their own statuses. Okay. But just be wary that oftentimes they'll be talking about how they're testing something that is still in the status of to do, right? And so listen for those kind of anomalies, right? Listen for when your team is working on things or they're telling you that they're doing things, but Jira is not reflecting that reality. All right. So you want to make sure that you're listening for that. Next up, we're going to talk about blocked work. Okay. Oftentimes they're going to get stuck, right? Team members are going to get stuck and they're going to get blocked. And that's okay. Life happens and they're depending on people. We're human. And I would expect blockages to happen fairly often. So there's 3 different ways to manage blocked items. My preferred method, because it's very visual, is if right here Alana's telling us we're fixing the typo on the contact us page, and if she goes, I can't find the contact us page, and she's blocked, then the easiest way, my 2 cents, this is my preferred method, is to right click on this item and add a flag. When you add the flag, it's going to prompt you to put in a reason, right? Alana can't find the contact us page. And then you can go at admin, tag somebody. Can you help out? Right. And when you do this, you're doing like it's a trifecta here. 1, we're documenting what the blockage is, right? 2, we are calling out people to help us out with the blockage. And 3, it's now yellow. And so tomorrow when I come back in for an update, it's catching my eyes because we have a yellow item here, and that's going to require some work. Second, there's this little thing over here called Sprint Insights. And so work items that need attention is going to be all my items that are flagged. And so now this particular item, fixed typo, is flagged, and I can just go to a single location and find those items. If you have a status of blocked, right? If you have a column called blocked, you will not benefit from any of these work items that need attention. Okay. And so you want to make sure that if you truly want to use, like if you want this sprint um, and insights to work for you, you need to either block by using the blocks and blocks by relationship, or you're flagging the way I just described. But if you just have a status of blocked or a priority called blocker, it's not going to do you any good because it's not going to elevate it for you or escalate it. Angie says it was something I found challenging each workday, reminding grown folks to do what's expected, but I got corrected when we rotated the Scrum Master role to everyone on the team. Oh, I got that correct. Yeah. So yeah, it's funny sometimes. Sometimes I feel like we work with a bunch of kindergartners. Okay, but that would be my 2 cents. But you're listening for blocked items, right? They should be telling you those impediments, right? The typical daily Scrum script is what did I do yesterday, what am I doing today, and any impediments. You want to flag those impediments by making them yellow by adding the flag. You can do JQLs on this. You can put them on dashboards. You get them in the sprint insights. They're yellow on the screen, so they're like yelling at you a lot. So that would be my 2 cents. Next up, we want to listen for stale work. We want to listen for work that's not moving, right? And we do that by modifying our board, right? And so you want to go to your board settings, which have recently moved as part of the new UI. So you can either click up here on these ellipses here, or if you hover over your board, you will see that ellipses present themselves. So you go to your board settings and you want to go to card layout. Yes, you want to go to card layout and you have this toggle here that says days in column. You want to turn that on. And when you turn that on and you go to your board, you're going to get bubbles. You're going to get these little circles. And when you hover over those little circles, it's going to tell you how many days that particular item has been in that particular column. And so when this thing starts saying 7 out of 10 days and it's still in to do, this is where you as a scrum master, you need to start going, hey, what's going on here? Why are we 7? Why hasn't this thing been updated in 7 days? Right? Because when that work becomes stale, that's when either the developer's off doing something else or doing something else or not working on that thing, right? And so you want to follow up with your team here and you want to make sure that these numbers and days in your column don't get too far, don't get too big, because the longer something sits and just sits on your board, the longer the higher probability is that you're not going to complete your sprint, right? Because if you're 7 days into a 10-day sprint and it's still in to do, your probabilities of success go lower and lower by each passing hour, right? Especially if you're 9 out of 10, then forget about it, right? It's like game over. And so you want to stay on top of these. You want to make sure that this feature is enabled and that you're hovering over these items daily to see if anything is stuck, right? Maybe we are blocked on a few items, but your developer is just not telling you, because the harsh reality here that you're going to find is that your developers are usually really, really smart people, right? Sometimes they're Ivy League graduates, right? Sometimes they're super smart. They're highly, highly paid. Engineers typically get paid a lot of money, right? Especially like more money than you and me. And so one of the things that you want to be careful here, right, is or at least be aware of, is that no developer is ever going to admit their faults, right? Nobody's going to say, "Hey, you know what? I'm stuck. I'm stuck. I'm not really sure what's going on." They're gonna go figure it out, right? They're gonna figure out to the end of time. And so it's your duty, your responsibility. If you want to increase your probability of success here, your responsibility to go fish that information from your developers. Because again, they're not going to openly, most of the time, right? Some of them might do a good job, but for the majority of the time, no developer is going to say, you know what? I don't know how to do something. Because none of us, right? None of us are going to admit that we don't know how to do something, right? And so it's a hard thing to ask. And you tend to fall into this trap where you think work is being done, but it's secretly not being done. All right. And so keep an eye out for that stale work, because it usually means that the developer is unsure of something. They're not ready to do it, right? Which is a different, bigger problem that you have, right? Because ultimately, if you have too many items that are stale, that are just sitting here, sprint to sprint, then you need to have a bigger conversation when you're planning your sprint, because those estimates have to account for the level of unknown that is in each story, right? And so If your teams are basically telling you, hey, we're not sure about this or we're not sure about that, then that usually means that some story is unknown, right? That there's too many variables that the developer is just not comfortable with, and they're just not telling you about it, right? So they're either A, going to give you a ridiculously high story point estimate, like 21, or they're just going to hide it and just not tell you. So, and keep an eye out for these things because these are little data points that you can leverage as the Scrum Master to help move the needle and increase the probability that your team actually finishes the work that they signed up for. Because oftentimes you just kind of look at these and go, and you brush them off, or you don't have that insight, and then again things get left behind. All right, a couple more things to talk about, and then we're gonna wrap this one up here. Um, if every day, my 2 cents is every day you should be going to reports, and every day you should be looking at your burn down chart. This is very, very important. Every single day you should be looking at your burn down chart. Holy moly, what happened here? Okay, these are bad examples, but every day you should look at your burnout chart for a variety of reasons. Number one, this red line tells you a lot of information, right? This red line needs to start at the top. It needs to be high up because you got to burn down. And what I often see is a lot of teams will start at 0 and then it shoots up immediately on the first day. And what that tells me is that they started the sprint before they put points in, right? Oftentimes I'll see that it started at 0 and then like a day or two later, then they put the points in. Again, don't ever start your sprint without putting the points in because then it'll reflect here in the chart. So make sure that you always start your sprint with the points in it so that your chart starts at the top and then you're able to burn down. Next up, if you see the line go up, you got to remind yourself that this is a burn down chart. So the line should go down and not up. Although the unfortunate reality is that things are going to go up from time to time, right? Scope increase, you got a VP that runs in frantically telling you this thing needs to get done, or you have a demo for the client or the customer or something, right? You got to drop what you're doing and fix something. That's okay. We deal with those as appropriate, but you don't want it to become a habit where all you're doing is going up, because every time your sprint goes up, you minimize the probability you're going to complete your work, right? And so again, you want to tame these spikes. You want to challenge every spike that comes into your sprint, not the spike issue type, but the spike in the graph, right? Because the spike in the graph represents new work that was not planned, right? It's work that got added to your sprint after you hit the start sprint button. And so as a scrum master, you got to hold the line here. You got to understand and challenge why an item is being pulled into your sprint. And there's almost always a good reason. Cool, great, awesome. But my recommendation, it's make it a trade-off. Tell them if you're going to pull something into my sprint, you got to take something out of my sprint, because if you just absorb it, then your probability that you're going to be able to finish the commitments of your sprint start going down dramatically. And so a swap I'm okay with, but just accepting new work, especially when you plan a full sprint, you're just basically setting yourself up for failure at that point as well. And so watch those spikes on the graph because they're never good. Next thing to watch out for is watch out for the line going across flat, because a flat line means that even though your team is working on the stories, right, they might move things from in progress to testing to accepted. The red line will only go down if it makes it to the farthest right column. And so if your team is going flat, 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 and then a cliffhanger at the end, that means that they're waiting until the last minute to finish updating their statuses in Jira. And that's not going to be good or healthy either, right? Because it doesn't give you a good representation of if your team needs help or how you can help as a scrum master. So you want to be watching for these plateaus or these flat lines, because they're basically telling you that either your workflow is too complex, that your team's not able to get to the farthest right column quickly, or B, the story was so massive that that took them the whole sprint to get to the farthest right column, right? And so in both cases, you want to be ahead of these problems and you want to be addressing them, because they're just not going to help you in the long term. And then, the last general tip here is that this red line is supposed to hug this gray line as much as possible. And so keep that in mind, that the objective here is for that red line to follow the gray line and hug it as much as possible. All right. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm gonna leave you here with our couple of things here. So I do offer, if you enjoyed this class, make sure you hit the subscribe button. If you're not a member, we got Chad from the beginning. So thank you, Chad, again so much for becoming a member and supporting the channel here. A few bucks here and there helps out a lot. My kids like to eat a lot. And so definitely make sure you check out the membership opportunities here because there's a lot happening, right? And so on the next one, we're going to go over sprint demo tips for next month. But I do teach other classes, all right? So check out that link tree. We're actually, let me give you the right link here. If you're interested in signing up for any of the other classes, make sure again you become subscribe to the channel. But feel free to go to this website here where the rest of the classes are available. You can sign up for one, sign up for many. I have a bunch of peers that also do very similar courses. So if you're looking for a lot of fun, free trainings, check out those ACE live learning classes. All right. Also, I do have a couple of Udemy courses. So if you want to get some discounts on those, check out the coupon codes that I'm dropping in here. I have a Jira fundamentals that kind of walks you through an example here on how to use Jira. And then I have a new course that is really for like BAs on how to plan the sprint, execute the sprint, a little bit more of a synopsis of what this course is all about. Then it's just 2 hours, and you can check those both out. And so you'll get some coupon codes there. The ACP 420 is coming in 2 weeks. We're going to start our ACP 420 guide. So if you haven't subscribed to the Jira Life, highly recommend you go check out the Jira Life. And then finally, as my parting words here, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a request. It's in the link tree here. So if you go over to my link tree, which I just pasted into the chat, there is a connect with me on LinkedIn. At the very least, it doesn't hurt you, doesn't cost you anything, but connect with me on LinkedIn. But definitely check out if you need any help, right? One-on-one help. I have a bunch of 15-minute options, 1-hour options. I have free courses. I have a book that I published. So if you're interested in that, donate to the channel, become a member. I have a merch store. I got the podcast. I got the Jira Life. Lots happening in this life. So if you're interested in any of that, check out that link tree where you'll find everything. For everybody else, thank you very much. I'll see you all next week if you join me on the next course. Otherwise, I'll see you next month to talk about sprint demos. Thank you all. Bye.